So firstly, I would like to acknowledge that this seminar is being held on the traditional lands of the Gubbi Gubbi people, who we pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Now, finally, I want to welcome everyone to the Pacific Seminar Series with the Australian Centre for Pacific Islands Research. My name is Bridget Horsey and I'm going to be hosting the seminar for you today. Now, the topic of today's seminar is Partnerships for Knowledge Sharing, so the Toksave Pacific Gender Resource and the PNG Family Protection Order Study. And this is going to be presented to us today by Lindy Kanan. So a warm welcome to Lindy. She's sitting outside from me right now. So Lindy is a Senior Research Officer at the Australian National University's Department of Pacific Affairs, as well as an Adjunct Industry Fellow at the School of Law and Society at the University of the Sunshine Coast. Lindy works on various projects relating to international development, gender, domestic violence and women's safety in Australia and the Pacific. Now, in the seminar today, Lindy will speak about two unique projects with a common theme of creating partnerships for sharing knowledge on issues relating to gender equality in the Pacific. So the first, and I apologise because I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, Lindy, but the Toksave, Pacific Gender Resource. And this is a new website which aims to address gender inequality in the Pacific by ensuring quality Pacific research and knowledge is discoverable and accessible. The second is a research project undertaken in 7 locations of Papua New Guinea to investigate the use of family protection orders as a response to domestic violence. Lindy will present the findings of the study, which involved 3 universities, 4 non-government organisations, 25 local researchers and interviews with over 100 survivors of domestic violence. Now, I won't take up any more of everyone's time and I'm going to hand you over to Lindy. So thanks, Lindy.
Great, thank you so much for the welcome, Bridget. It's so great to be here. I feel very lucky to be here on campus here at the University of Sunshine Coast, and really a big thank you to the Australian Centre for Pacific Islands Research here at USC for inviting me to present today. So two projects that I've been working on over the past 18 months or so, with a common theme of partnerships and sharing of knowledge, also gender and the Pacific are 2 themes that have been running through my work. Also just want to say thank you to University of Sunshine Coast for making me an adjunct fellow here, and I've really enjoyed working with Harriet, who's invited me to give a guest lecture for her international development students. I'm also involved in a few different things here on the Sunshine Coast. I've also done some work with the Centre for, with CIDCEL, Centre for International Development, Social Entrepreneurship and Leadership. And I also do some volunteer work here with the Sunshine Coast Domestic and Family Violence Coordination Service. So I'll jump into the first project, which is the Toksave Pacific Gender Resource. This is essentially a website at that address, toksavepacificgender.net. So feel free to check it out after my talk, not now. So the aim of this resource is to address gender inequality in the Pacific by ensuring that Pacific research and knowledge is discoverable and accessible. The vision for this site is to bring ethical gender research into one place, to build knowledge and inform policy, to provide opportunities for a community of practice to emerge, to support collaboration, reflection and learning, and to promote research capacity building for Pacific researchers interested in addressing gender inequality. So these 6 amazing women make up the reference group of the Pacific Gender Resource. Just to give a little bit of background, there are a number of workshops held in 2014, 2016 at the University of the South Pacific. I wasn't present at those workshops, but the idea for this resource came out of those workshops, and these amazing women, some of them on your screen at the moment, really saw a need for a place for gender research on the Pacific to be available and accessible. So we've got Kim Robinson from the Pacific community, Susanna Tower from National University of Samoa, Yvonne Underhill-Sem from University of Auckland, Professor Betty Levi from University of Papua New Guinea, Nicole Haley from ANU, and Margaret Misha from University of South Pacific. And my role in this project has been as part of the project team at the ANU. We received some funding from the Pacific Women Shaping Pacific Development program last year to kind of make this vision a reality of creating this resource. My role has essentially been sort of liaising between this reference group and working with the project team at ANU. We've engaged some external website developers, a Canberra-based company called Rowdy, to help us create the site. So what does Toksave mean? Tok means to talk, to say, to speak. This is in Tok-Pisin language. Save means knowledge, wisdom, understanding, to know. Put them together, and Toksave means to announce, to explain, to clarify, to declare. So the members of our reference group, this name was put forward by Professor Betty Levi at the University of Papua New Guinea, and the members of the reference group just thought it was a really great word to embody what this website and what this portal wants to do. So this is just a screenshot of the homepage. When we're working with the web developers, I guess some really important specifications that we wanted it to be mobile friendly. We wanted to make sure that it worked even if you had slow connections. And as we've been adding research to it, we wanted as much as possible to have the research on the site, because we all know how frustrating it is to come across broken links on websites that aren't updated. So I'll take you through the different elements of the site. So you'll land on the homepage. We have the about information with a bit of the background, and then the research tab is where we house research on gender issues in the Pacific. And then if you sign up to become a member of Toksave, which is free and which I encourage all of you today to do if you have an interest in gender in the Pacific, do sign up, and then you'll be able to visit the discussion forum, talk with other members. It'll also give you the ability to upload research yourself, whether it's your own research or other research that's open access or that you have permission to share. And you'll also be able to access the directory to see other members. The What's On section is for events. As a member, you can upload events, but if you're not a member, you can still see events there. And we really encourage people across the Pacific to upload any events that are relevant to gender that others might be interested in attending. So this is what it looks like when you go to the research tab. You can search by keyword or by author. You can also filter by country. So if you're interested in Samoa or a particular country, you can filter that way, and it will come up with the research on that country. You can also, there's also tags you can search by, and also broad overarching categories like politics, environment, that sort of thing. When we launched, the site was launched in April this year at the Triennial Conference of Pacific Women, organised by SPC, the Pacific Community. And so when it launched, we had around 600 pieces of research on it. And then slowly the community's been growing and people have been adding their research, and it's now tracking towards 700 items. And what we see is this will just continue to grow over the years and into the future. This is a look of what it looks like when you click on a particular piece of research. So if the person, if one of the authors is a member of Toksave, you'll be able to see you'll be able to click on their little profile and go to their profile, as you can see up above. But then it's got just the abstract and then the ability to either download it or to go to the website where you can access it. This is the form to upload research, so it's really just quite simple, putting in the author's names, the abstract, which categories it fits under, whether it's peer reviewed or not, and then just a declaration that you do have permission to share that particular piece of research. And then you can either attach the file or pop in the link. If both are available, then both are great. And this is what the discussion forum looks like. We can see there a post by one of the members, and then you can also use the little @ symbol to tag other members. So yeah, I encourage you, if you have any issues you'd like to share relating to gender in the Pacific, do jump on there, ask for help. If there's a particular author or member you'd like to ask a question to, you can use that, you can tag them. So that was just a quick overview of the website. These are the contact details. There's also a Facebook account and a Twitter account and an email address with any questions. It's quite new. We see this sort of as stage one. The initial vision, was for something a bit bigger, and it's something that also created opportunities for Pacific women to develop their skills in research and to be sort of a capacity building mechanism as well. So the funding that we got only allowed sort of this stage one to build the website and get it out there. And so now we'll be working with the reference group to see where we can take it from here. We know there's a lot of limitations. The ANU has been responsible for getting the research together, so I'm well aware that a lot of the research on there is by the ANU, and there's probably a lot out there in the Pacific that we need to find and get on there. So if we'd really love for anyone on this Zoom call to get involved, also get in contact with us if you have ideas about how to get the message out more broadly. And I guess bringing it back to the title of the talk on the partnerships, I think it's been a really great model of having this reference group of advisors from 6 different countries across the Pacific, from universities who could provide advice that had a lot of challenges, and there's been a lot of robust discussions about identity and cultural appropriation and colonization and the role of Pacific Islanders and non-Pacific Islanders in doing Pacific research. But I think it's really meant that we've come up with a really rich product. We're really lucky to have had Rowdy build it. You can see it's quite a beautiful website. And yes, so we hope that for those of you with a particular interest in gender, that you'll sign up and add your research and be a part of the community that we're building. The second project that I wanted to speak about today is a project on family protection orders in Papua New Guinea. This is a project I've been working on with Dr. Judy Putt of the ANU, who I believe is online here as well as Bridget said at the beginning, a team in PNG, 25 local researchers, a number of NGOs, and a number of academics at Papua New Guinean universities. Just to start off, I've got a short video to explain what protection orders are.
Domestic violence can involve assault, sexual abuse, threats, damaging property, or stalking. It usually occurs in marriages, but can involve other family members. Domestic violence is a crime and should be reported to the police and charges laid, but a victim also has the option of applying for a family protection order. A family protection order is made by the court to stop domestic violence. There are 2 types of family protection orders. An interim protection order, or IPO, can last up to 30 days and can also be extended by a further 30 days. A protection order, or PO, lasts for longer and can be in place for up to 2 years. Village courts and district courts issue IPOs. Only district courts can issue a protection order. When an order is issued, the magistrate sets conditions. Conditions aim to prevent further domestic violence. The order may state that the perpetrator be of good behavior, commit no more violence or abuse, stay away from the victim or home, and or go to counseling. Charges can be laid and the offender arrested if the order is not obeyed. Applying for an order involves some paperwork, including completing a form. Help and advice on family protection orders may be found at a police family and sexual violence unit, from the IPO clerk at a district court, a domestic violence service, or the public solicitor's office. There are no application fees. Once an application is lodged at a district court, a date is set for an IPO hearing. The person who is accused of committing domestic violence is called the respondent. The respondent can appear at the hearing and put forward his or her point of view. The respondent does not need to be present at the court for an IPO to be granted. At the hearing, the magistrate will issue an IPO if they are satisfied that the applicant is in danger of domestic violence. Once an IPO or protection order has been issued by the court, it must be given to the respondent to become active. This is called serving the order. After an IPO or protection order has been served, it becomes a criminal offense if the respondent doesn't follow the conditions in the order. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, seek support and consider whether an IPO could help. For more information about domestic violence and the services in your area, call One Talk Counseling Helpline Line for free on 7150-8000.
So that was one of the videos that we produced as part of the research project. It's available in English and in Toksave, but I'll speak about those briefly a little bit later. So what is a family protection order? Hopefully you got the gist from the video. Also known as a restraining order or a domestic violence order, also an apprehended violence order in some states. It's a tool that's used across the world to prevent or reduce domestic and family violence. And its intention is that by taking out an order, it can reduce the risk of future harm by one family member who's considered to be a threat to another. So to put this into context for Papua New Guinea, the Family Protection Act was introduced in Papua New Guinea in 2013 and was enacted in 2014. And it was with this act that family protection orders became an option under the PNG law. There were some regulations passed in 2017, which provided more information and made more clarity about processes around family protection orders. And some of the key elements of that Family Protection Act are that it defines domestic violence as a criminal offence. It introduced the civil regime of family protection orders. There's two types of orders, as we heard in the videos, IPOs and POs. IPOs being the interim protection orders, which are the short term, and POs can be the protection orders, which can be in place for up to 2 years. The other key element of the Family Protection Act was that it made breaching an order a criminal offence. So what was the research project about? These are the questions that we set out to answer. We wanted to know, how have family protection orders been implemented in PNG since the Family Protection Act came into place, and if they're being used? What are the process challenges, or what are the processes and challenges for the system? And what has been the impact of family protection orders on the applicants and the respondents? So the applicants are the people who apply for an order, the respondents is the alleged perpetrator of the violence. What's been the impact on the justice system and delivery of services? And also what's been the impact of the protection orders on society and PNG more generally? These are some of the partners that were involved in the project. So the project was funded by the Australian government through the Pacific Women Shaping Pacific Development Program, as well as the Justice Services and Stability for Development Program, JSS4D. And Judy and I at the ANU worked in conjunction with academics at the University of Papua New Guinea and the University of Technology in Lae. We worked with 4 specialist domestic and family violence organisations in PNG. Family PNG, who is in Lae and Port Moresby, and also now in Goroka. The Nazareth Centre for Rehabilitation, that's based on Bougainville. FHI 360, who works in a number of places in PNG, but we specifically worked with them in Mount Hagen. And then Voice for Change, which is an NGO based in Juaka province. So these are the sites where the research took place. 7 sites in total. So Mount Hagen in Western Highlands province, Minge in Juaka province, Lae in Morobe province, Port Moresby in National Capital District, Popondetta in Oro province, and then Buka and Arawa in the autonomous region of Bougainville. These locations were agreed on in conjunction with the project funders. Judy had led a project in Lae in 2019, which was sort of a pilot project, just looking at family protection orders in Lae. After that, we received the funding from Pacific Women to look at what's happening more nationally. So we wanted to get a picture of what's happening on some of the islands, in the highlands, in the cities. Initially, we had wanted to also get a picture of the rural areas, but logistically it was quite difficult to get out of the major centres.
So the project timeframe was from May 2019 till October 2020. The data collection finished up in about August last year, and we were writing the reports towards the end of last year, and they were published in February of this year. The methods that we used to collect the data, so a total of 211 interviews were carried out with 118 survivors. So that's applicants of family protection orders, and they were mostly women, and they were spread out across all of those sites that I mentioned, with the exception of, there was a few in Mount Hagen, but not many. We did interviews with over 140 different stakeholders. So we visited all of the sites, spoke to the services, the specialist services, police, courts, hospitals, all of the stakeholders that are playing a role in supporting survivors of domestic violence in Papua New Guinea. We undertook a survey of 180 young adults in Port Moresby. This was where our academics from UPNG and Unitec were instrumental. They got on board their students to help with the data collection and to carry out the survey in Port Moresby. We collected data from police, courts and NGOs wherever it was available. And then we also observed court processes. And we had a law student at UPNG who was particularly helpful with observing court processes, who he sat in court hearings in Port Moresby for us and sent through reports on how the protection order hearings were playing out. So what did we find through the research? In terms of awareness, we found that there was an increasing awareness of interim protection orders, especially among young people, urban and educated adults. In the survey, more than 1/3 knew about them. We found, however, there was a more limited understanding of protection orders, the longer term orders, and who could apply for them. We found that when people needed help, they're most likely to speak to family and friends, and then the police. In terms of getting practical help, people said they're most likely to go to the police or to a specialist service if they knew that there was one available in their area, which is not the case for the whole country. We also found that a lot of help was needed going through the process, because most of the women that we interviewed who wanted orders, said that they couldn't read or write English very well. The courts are done in English, so that support is really needed to get through all the paperwork that's needed to apply for an order. Some of the trends and patterns that we saw, that the number of interim protection orders was definitely increasing, especially since 2017, we saw a real increase. And I think that's because that's also when the regulations came in and there was a lot more training being done on how the system was supposed to be working. So we saw a big increase and then it sort of stabilized. We did, however, find there was a lot of variation across the different provinces. So looking at court data for 2018, only 6 district courts issued more than 100 IPOs. And we found that didn't necessarily correlate with population size of the city where the court was located. Very few IPOs are being issued in the Highlands, and not many interim protection orders were being converted to longer term orders, except where there was a specialist service like Family PNG, who was really supporting the survivor, really letting them, where the service had a really good understanding of the options, could let the survivor know and help her through that if that's the course of action she wanted to take. What did we find out about the applicants and respondents to orders? So around 9 in 10 of the IPO applicants were women. This is of the interviews that we did. They usually had children. The respondent to the order was normally a male spouse, so generally her husband or intimate partner. The majority of applicants said that they did have family support and financial means to live on their own, albeit often precarious financial means, such as selling at the markets. And we also asked the applicants what was the reaction of the respondent when he received the order. The most common response was that he complied. The next most common response was that he responded with threatening and furious behaviour.
So what are some of the challenges within the justice system of having this new regime in place? We found that there was a lack of access or intermittent access to basic resources that are needed to implement the system. You know, courts might have had printers but no ink, or printers that didn't work. Police always told us, you know, they didn't have a vehicle. So it makes it very difficult to serve an order, arrest someone who breaches an order if you don't have a vehicle or some of those basic things. As mentioned before, the formal legal system relies on written records, which creates a challenge for people wanting to take out an order. We found that among the staff and the people working in the system, sometimes limited skills, not very gender sensitive, sometimes victim blaming attitudes, or sort of an attitude of, you know, not my problem. We also found high rates of absenteeism among the crucial personnel, normally the government employees, the police, the court staff, or insufficient numbers of staff. Issues specific with family protection orders. We found that a lot of the applicants were confused about the process, not a good understanding of the terminology. You know, even when speaking with services about protection orders, the POs, people would call them different things. Some people would call them permanent orders or preventative orders. So a little bit of confusion about the different types of orders and how they work. We found courts were not always a safe place for the victims. In some places, we found really great examples, especially where a service like Family PNG was involved, making sure that when survivors went to the court, you know, they could enter through the staff entrance, and they could get an order without being seen by the respondent. But that wasn't the case across the country. It was only in special situations. We found that the process was just too slow. It took an average of 14.8 days to get an interim protection order. In theory, they should be issued within 24 hours because they are essentially an emergency order. We found that police were not always that helpful, not always assisting with some parts of the process, which the police are supposed to be doing, like serving the order, serving summons, or responding when an order is breached. Another challenge was the costs associated with multiple court appearances. Well, it doesn't cost anything to apply for an order unless you live next door to the courthouse. It's costing you every time you come to the courthouse. So we found also it's very common to have multiple adjournments, people having to come back until everything was in place. So what were the impacts of the orders on applicants and respondents? 81% of the people that we interviewed said that they felt safer after getting an order in place. They reported feelings of empowerment and improved mental well-being. We asked them what they thought helped in the process. They said having a local specialist FSV service, family and sexual violence service, those specialist domestic violence NGOs that do amazing work but aren't located everywhere and are really under-resourced. Also having family support, having somewhere to live apart, away from the perpetrator when the police take action, and having the respondent appear before a district court magistrate. A number of the women said in their interviews that, you know, bringing him before a judge really made a difference. He'd never had any contact with the justice system, but having him come to court, have to stand before a magistrate and be told, you know, what you're doing is wrong, this order is being taken out against you, you know, it was really shocking and really did help. Others who are in and out of the criminal justice system didn't really care. The applicants were cautious, however, about feelings of safety being sustained. So most of them said they felt safer as a result of the order, but there was this feeling of, I don't know how long it's going to last. A minority of the respondents said that the abuse didn't stop because of the order. However, around 70%, the majority said that the respondent did comply. Of the breaches of the orders that were reported, most of those were done by phone or by text, but in general, they weren't reported to the police or the court. So what's been the impact on the justice system and society? Having the family protection orders in place has created an extra workload for the district courts. Some have dedicated clerks, IPO clerks, who are supporting the protection order process. Others don't, and it's sort of doing it on top of their normal workload. We found that very few village courts are issuing interim protection orders. So under the Family Protection Act, village courts do have the authority to issue IPOs, but in reality, we found it wasn't happening very often. Having the orders has provided another avenue that Family and Sexual Violence Unit Police and other services can use when seeking justice for their clients. Some people told us it strengthened the coordination between the services, courts and the police, because now the services are acting on behalf of the client, following up with the court, following up with the police, and having regular meetings to follow up on cases. One thing that we did find was no link between criminal and civil matters. So in theory, you could apply for a protection order, which is a civil part of the civil regime, but at the same time, you could also be, the perpetrator could be charged with a criminal offence. In reality, this wasn't happening. It was sort of basically just the IPOs, and we found very little criminal matters were being, very few charges were being laid for the criminal offence of domestic violence. The last point there was sort of no stance on how community-based processes could work with protection orders. So those who are familiar with PNG will know that mostly disputes are dealt with at the local level in community situations. But there was sort of a lack of guidance around how family protection orders could work with those. The exception to that we did find in Bougainville with the Nazareth Centre for Rehabilitation, where they were counselling women, where they were helping to facilitate those community-based processes, but also making sure that an order was in place, and they really saw that importance, so that when the woman returns to the village, she has that order and that extra layer of protection. So I'll just go through a few of the conclusions that we came to. There's 7 of them. So family protection orders are becoming more well known in PNG, but the processes are still not widely and well understood. Increasing awareness is really important, but the system also needs further funding and resources to respond to the demand. The system was really stretched. The police have a really critical role to play in supporting survivors, but they weren't always fulfilling their role effectively. That the specialist services, where they're available, make a really big difference in supporting and helping survivors to navigate the situation. That obtaining orders depends on access to district courts and committed magistrates. So just because you can access a district court doesn't mean you can get an order. As I mentioned earlier, we did see a lot of variation. So in some provinces, the senior provincial magistrate really understood the system. A lot of orders were being issued. It was working really well. In other provinces, where there was maybe less knowledge or understanding by the senior provincial magistrate, potentially not many orders at all were being issued. We concluded that family protection orders do improve safety for most applicants. However, the time of service of the order can be a time of risk. And then having support from family and the church can improve the effectiveness of family protection orders and reduce risks to survivors. So that was a really quick overview of the project and what we found and what we wanted to find. These are the reports that we've written that are available on the DPA website, also available on Toksave. If you type in family protection orders, they'll come up. So the purple one is the project from the pilot study that Judy led in Lay, which I mentioned earlier. So that was published in 2019. The rest have been published this year. So we have the main report, which is in the middle on the left. Then for those who prefer to read a 6-page report rather than a 100-page report, there's a summary report as well. And then there was a few sort of themes that came out of the research that we wanted to highlight separately. So on the top right, we've got a report on the survey that was undertaken in Lay and Port Moresby. We've written a separate brief on domestic violence and family law. Before I joined DPA, I spent a year working at the Commonwealth Attorney General's department working on family law and domestic violence. So when I was going into PNG, I had a lot of questions about family law and really wanted to understand the system there. I still don't understand it, but we've tried to write something because the last piece of academic work was written 25 years ago on family law. So I think there's a conversation ready to happen there. And then the last one is a report on court processes in PNG, and that's largely based on the work of Philemon, our UPNG law student who sat in court and wrote reports on what was happening. I also sat in a number of hearings in Ley and Port Moresby, so we wrote that report together. So at the beginning, we had a video. What we had wanted to do after we collected all the data is to have a workshop in Port Moresby and bring together magistrates from all of the provinces, the researchers, the NGOs, get everybody together and sort of tell them what we'd found and have it validated and have a discussion about it. That workshop was postponed and then eventually cancelled because of COVID. So unfortunately, the reports potentially aren't as good as they could have been if we had that chance for feedback. But it did make us think about, how can we get these research findings out in different ways? So we created a series of videos on the project. So the first two you can see there are, there's part one, which is about the research process. Part two is on the research findings, and we've got footage and testimonies from some really amazing Papua New Guinean women in that one. And then the last three on that page you can see there are the Family Protection Orders Explained, the video which I showed at the beginning, the English version, and then the top position with English subtitles is there as well. So you can find those by going to YouTube and just searching for the Department of Pacific Affairs. And then there's a separate playlist for the PNG Family Protection Order project. I also just wanted to acknowledge the contribution of Shalana Wally. She was one of our research assistants in Oro province. Sadly, she passed away earlier this year. She was really amazing. She did our interviews with survivors, also interviews with village court magistrates. So I just really wanted to acknowledge her contribution to the project. So I was reflecting on this sort of in the context of the title for today's presentation, Partnerships for Knowledge Sharing. I'm not sure if some of you saw a blog on the Dev Policy blog last week, which was about international development research and 10 key insights. And I thought there were some valuable points there about partnerships in international development research. And I think it's really good to think about, has there been a balanced involvement between Australia-based researchers and in-country partners? Have there been local actors involved in informing the research design and agenda? And what are the pathways for the research to have impact at different levels? So I think reflecting on those within this project, I think we did a really good job of getting a lot of different actors on board and involved. I think it's far from perfect. At the end of the day, we're still two Australian researchers leading a project in partnership with these other partners. And I think it's always good to ask the question of, who's funding it, where is the power, where is the money? And it's something that I reflect on a lot. But I like to think the research has been really useful. Although we didn't get to do that workshop that we wanted to do, there has been an inquiry into gender-based violence in PNG this year. A special parliamentary committee has been formed. We wrote a submission to that inquiry and the report was published this month with lots of references to our research. So I think it means that somebody's read it, which is great, and it is in some way having an impact and informing the policy debate in PNG. So these two projects have pretty much been my life for the last couple of years. And I just thought I'd just provide one slide on what I'm working on next. So working on a project looking at safety and wellbeing of participants in Australia's Pacific labour mobility programs. So a little bit of a different focus, but looking at Pacific Islanders who are in Australia under these work programs, having a look at what factors influence their safety and wellbeing while they're here in Australia working, things like where they're located, the accommodation that they have, what employment sector. Looking at what are the help-seeking behaviours of workers from the Pacific and Timor-Leste. We already know that when people have problems, they feel more comfortable speaking to friends and family. And although there's a great setup in place, there's a wellbeing hotline. We know that people are more comfortable, especially from the Pacific, using other means to seek help. So we'll be looking at that and seeing how the system can potentially be improved. We've also been working quite closely with the Pacific Labour Scheme. They're setting up a new regional wellbeing network to support workers in different areas of Australia. So we're working together with them to have a look at what the impact of those networks are, and is that something that can be replicated. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope I haven't bored you to death, but would really love to have any feedback, comments, or questions.
Thank you, Lindy, and thanks for sharing your work with us today. That really was very interesting and such important research. So it's really nice to hear the hard work that you've been working towards. It's also great to hear about their website, Toksave. I know I'm looking forward to jumping on and having a look at that after the seminar today. We will open it up for questions now. And I did notice there was a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll make sure I go back to the first one. So we've got a question here, Lindy, from Rosie, and she's just asked, was there any feedback from women with disabilities and their families?
Unfortunately not, and this is something that we did want to incorporate, and it's something that our donor asked us to incorporate as well. To have a look at how women with disability are being, if they're able to access family protection orders. At the end of the day, we tried, we reached out to a number of different disability organisations in PNG, didn't really get much of a response. And, I think if we could have spent more time there, we could have tried harder, but we were just very limited in, the time that we had for field work and how many meetings we could fit in. So unfortunately not in this study, but I think from previous work that I've done, looking at disability in PNG and gender and violence, I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area. So it will be interesting to look into it in future. Yeah,
sure. Do you know, Lindy, if there's any information and services that are accessible for people with disabilities?
So the Pacific Women Shaping Pacific Development has been funding a number of different NGOs in PNG that provide services for survivors, and part of those contracts is to make their organisations more disability accessible. Organisations like Family PNG definitely have sort of policies in place and have been looking at how they modify their practices to include people with disability. They work quite closely with the local disability organisation in Morobe province. I'm sure there's other ones as well, but they're the ones I'm most familiar with. But like everything, you're limited to if you can access one of those services. We know that 80% of the population in PNG lives in rural areas. So unfortunately, I would say the bulk of women do not have access to that kind of service.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We've got another question here from Patricia, and she's just asked, well, there's a couple of questions, but I'll start with the first one. How different was the court process compared to Australia? If you know how to answer that one, and any social workers, were they present during that process, and how well supported are the clients?
Yeah, I mean, funnily, I've spent a lot more time in Papua New Guinean courts than I have in Australian courts. So, but I would say they're very different. I think in terms of the structure and the legislation, a lot of similarities. I mean, I know, the woman at the Attorney General's Department in Canberra who was instrumental in helping PNG to write the legislation. So a lot of the laws are modelled on Australian laws. they've tried to adapt them for the local context. Same with the court system. It's sort of the system that's been transplanted. So a lot of challenges in terms of, things that I've mentioned about, just really basic things about printing and ink, and it's definitely, you turn up into the court and there's just piles of papers everywhere. It's definitely not an electronic case management system like we have in Australia. In terms of social workers, not really. I think that's something that we saw was really missing. Victim support, an area that more attention could be given to. But I guess those NGOs, a lot of their staff, they've completed a social work degree at UPNG, and they're being trained up to. Some of them come from different disciplines. They're not all social workers, but they are following sort of a social work type model of case management. So if you're attached to a service, you are getting that kind of support. If you're sort of going on your own, especially in Port Moresby, where, we saw a lot of educated women from the court hearings that I sat in, they weren't represented, they weren't with an NGO, they just applied for it themselves. They didn't have that kind of support with them.
Yeah, okay. That kind of leads nicely to the next question then from Pratisha, where she's just asked, are there any cultural barriers for women to get this support, and are there ways that this is being addressed at all?
Cultural barriers for women in PNG to get access to protection orders.
That might hold them back. I'm assuming this is what she means. It might hold them back from taking that step to reach out. And then it's probably something you didn't have scope for in the research, but maybe you have insight.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's something. I've been working in gender-based violence in PNG for a few years or so prior to the project. I think it's similar to, I think there's definitely a hesitancy to get support, and, I've spoken to workers at some of the services who have said, women are coming, they've said, I've been enduring this for 20 years, I can't take it anymore. So I think some of those cultural barriers are around a feeling that, violence happening in the home, it's not a public issue, it's a private issue, it's a family issue. So it's very difficult to go out of that family circle and seek support from a professional service, or to take it to the police. So I think there's a lot of barriers that do make it difficult.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Okay, we've just come to my attention, sorry Judy, but she's had her hand up for some time now, so we might let Judy speak now.
Hi Lindy, that was fantastic. I just wanted to make a comment about the question around disabilities. As Lindy already flagged, we did get a request to try and at least interview some survivors, but from the funders, but I don't know what others think, but it was challenging enough to conduct interviews with survivors in an ethical fashion without also the potential to place those with disabilities at risk. So we purposefully, I guess, decided not to, aside from, as Lindy mentioned, trying to contact some organisations that work with those who have disabilities. But the other issue we had around disabilities is how that might be defined locally as well. I mean, I'm currently involved in looking at designing a survey in Vanuatu about policing and justice there. And as a result, I looked at a survey in Vanuatu on wellbeing. I don't know whether many of you have had a chance to look at that, but when you drill down, in terms of the very small proportion of participants that were identified as having a disability, a third of those were in fact just elderly, not just because I'm one myself, but were elderly people. And there's that, conflation of being disabled and being old. So that is something else that I think needs further investigation. And just thirdly, because I don't want to bang on too much, is the in relation to how it compares to Australia, because over the years I've been in and out of all different kinds of courts here in Australia, and it does vary by jurisdiction, as Lindy said. But I guess for me, one of the critical differences is the options that are available to survivors in courts here, and they will get referrals to any number of services which just aren't there in a place like Papua New Guinea. Similarly, if the respondent, typically the male partner, there is nowhere to refer him to. There's no programs available except for one that was being piloted in Bougainville. So I think, to me, that's a key difference, not so much the judicial processes as such, which were not dissimilar, except less efficient, as Lindy flagged, but it was more around what other things the survivors and respondents could be offered, I guess.
Thanks, Judy, for your input there. Just looking at the time, it is 1 o'clock, so we'll go to one of the last questions in the chat, and then we'll finish up. But there's a question there from Silute asking, is there a system or a monitoring and evaluation in place to follow up the welfare of the victims months and years after the assistance has been provided, or the FPO?
In terms of the protection orders through the court system, no. I mean, there's barely data collected on what's happening now, let alone any system to, periodically follow up. Some of the NGOs would be doing that, and collecting a lot of data on survivors, and over time having a look at what their situation is, if their long-term needs have been met. But more generally with the family protection orders through the court systems, no.
On that note, we will thank you and finish up for the seminar today. So thanks so much for joining us and taking the time out of your day. And thanks everyone else for connecting with us online. It's been really nice to see some new faces as well. So yeah, we'll finish there. If you did enjoy today's seminar and would like to be added to our mailing list, please let us know. You can email us, but otherwise, thanks everyone, and we'll see you again soon.